Everyone. Welcome back to Short Stack Tabletop Gaming. My name is Greg, and today I would like to talk about faster dungeon crawling. So, faster dungeon crawling is an important issue because dungeon crawling is a tedious pain in the ass if you don't have your methods worked out. In a worst case scenario, you have a bunch of arguing players tossing out paranoid declarations and nobody knows who the leader is or can articulate where the group is going. It's a nightmare to describe the topography of the dungeon when you get to weird intersections and stuff. Dungeon crawling is actually a skill, and if the group is good at it, then it goes real fast. But if the group is not accustomed to it, it takes a long time. So let's get into it. I'm going to list 8 tools that you can use, 8 techniques that can be implemented to speed up the process of dungeon crawling so that it's actually enjoyable and a fairly quick endeavor. The first and most important tool to use when dungeon crawling is protocols, meaning that it is not necessary for players to constantly reiterate the actions that should be obvious or redundant. Instead, you can have the players determine their marching formation and any passive activities that their characters routinely perform whenever they come into a new environment. And this allows players to focus on the story without clamoring for the narrator's attention or being excessively paranoid. So, like if the rogue is constantly scanning for traps and looking for hidden loot and ambushes, that doesn't need to be repeated every single minute, right? If the warrior is always the first one into the room with the shield raised and never lets the wizard wander more than 10 feet away, that's fine. If you've got the cleric always using insight to study whoever the face of the party is talking to get a sense if they're lying, perfect. Players are responsible for writing down these protocols, and they have to declare their characters to be taking reasonable sets of actions, not crazy, impossibly paranoid things. But this makes things faster, right? It allows the dungeon master to secretly make skill checks automatically without players needing to repeat them over and over again. And pacing is crucial to a good dungeon crawl, so having a mob of players shouting out individual actions every time a new scene begins slows things to a crawl. And having protocols doesn't completely solve this problem, but it does mitigate it by doing away with repetition. So to set down protocols, you just make a Word file for this, and then you print it out and you hand it to your DM. And at that point, it's a matter of record, and nobody needs to fret because whenever XYZ occurs, you know that all the characters are doing certain things without needing to repeat themselves. Protocols are important. Uh, they really speed things up. The second important element to fast dungeon crawling is to have a leader or a caller nominated who determines when and where the party will actually go. It's okay for the rest of the team to advise this person, but ideally, it should usually be a warrior or a scout of some kind. That way, the executive power to move the team belongs to one individual and there's no dissent. Because otherwise, it just sort of turns into this herd of cows. The third element to fast dungeon crawling is to avoid specificity when you're searching. You don't say, I checked the statue for hidden compartments. Because if that's the way things are done, then it's going to take 2 hours to get through each room. Instead, it just needs to be consciously recognized that, I comb the entire room for hidden doors, traps, illusions, compartments, and so on, is a valid and acceptable course of action. The key word here is, as far as searching is concerned, comb. I comb for the things we normally look for is a great thing to say. It turns 20 sentences into one. And the fourth element to fast dungeon crawling is to use magic to scout ahead and then force portions of the map to be revealed to the players before they actually set out. So, sending an expendable familiar right into the dungeon in like bat form to map out the rooms. Great idea. It's a level 1 spell. You have it at level 1. You can see through that thing up to a mile away. It's like a floating drone camera. Casting clairvoyance or arcane eye, or like commune with nature to get the lay of the land, is even better. Because with these spells, you can transform a tedious map juggling exercise into a simple run. If the storyteller has to give you a map, even if there are no details of what's in the individual rooms, that speeds things up because you just say, we go here. And it's also believable that a group of adventurers going into a hostile dungeon environment would probably try to scout out without putting themselves at risk first. So the fifth element to fast dungeon crawling is to work out your combat tactics ahead of time and then stick to them whenever the party war leader calls for something from the team's playbook. And this is actually really useful. It's a huge time savings. So if a player's turn comes up in combat and they start fiddling with their spells or wondering who they should attack, it takes much longer than if they just say, oh, my job is to thin out weak enemies, so I'm going to delete those goblins to reduce the number of actions that need to be rolled each round, right? You don't always have to do something brilliant or inventive on your turn in combat, and you don't always have to make things up on the spot. In fact, it wastes time if you do. If you're playing like a rogue, and you know that your job is to use your bonus action to aim, and then use a missile weapon to make a ranged sneak attack on whoever the fighter is threatening to burn them down fast, then that's what you just do, right? And if you have a couple of different sets of tactics that the group uses, you can switch between them based on whatever the situation might be, and it cuts down on decision time. So that's a very important element to faster dungeon crawling. The sixth element is to use text to speech phone apps when the dungeon master starts discussing items or treasure. Because then you don't need to take copious notes or fuss with treasure lists. If you need to summarize or tabulate everything, or create a summary of what happened, in a room or something like that, you can just copy paste the blocks of relevant text into ChatGPT and then ask the AI to summarize it into notes and generate a list of treasure or items. And ChatGPT will do that in seconds. And you'll be pretty happy with the results. I've done it. If something needs to be fixed or it doesn't get something exactly right when you look over it, it's much faster to make small edits than doing the entire thing all by yourself. Much faster. So text to speech or speech to text. Yeah, speech to text. Taking dictation and then copy pasting that into ChatGPT. Very good for summarization. Very good for speeding up note taking. The seventh element to fast dungeon crawling is to have the dungeon master use a spreadsheet to make multiple rolls simultaneously. So you can use Excel or Google Sheets for this, and the formula you want is called rand between. You type an equal sign and then rand between and then parentheses and then 1 comma 20 and then close parentheses, close brackets after that. And then every time you refresh the page, it will generate a new random number within that range. And then you have a die 20, right? You can do this with every die type, and you can create entire rows of random numbers in the same range, which allows the dungeon master to roll skill checks and attack and damage rolls and saves and anything else with a single click. If you insert a checkbox on the screen, then every time you check or uncheck the box, it will randomize all the numbers that use rand between. So it's like a button. You can also create rand between with bonuses at the end by adding a plus sign and then a number after the parentheses. So if Joe the Rogue has a perception of +7, let's say, you can type equals sign rand between 1 comma 20 in parentheses and then a plus sign and then 7 and then boom, you have Joe's perception roll every time you click on the box. Nothing is counted, nothing is rolled, nobody knows what the dungeon master was checking. So nobody can have a paranoia tantrum because suddenly that person starts rolling dice unless you're sadistic and like to do that to your players behind a screen. And more importantly, if you're using protocols, nobody knows if they failed or not unless the dungeon master tells them because they're not sure what was being rolled. They could be clicking for anything, right? So this takes some of the work for a dungeon master to set up. But once you have that spreadsheet, it makes things stupendously fast, especially if you use rand between like 8 comma 48. You just created a field that gives you the damage of a fireball with one click. So play around with this. It's very handy, especially if you create like a condensed sheet with like a whole lot of numbers and values and things like that. The entire party's perception checks, right? You can do them all in one click. And the eighth and final element to fast dungeon crawling is ambiance. And I know that sounds kind of funky. It's not as technical a thing as the others, but if you make sure All your players have used the restroom and gotten any snacks or other things they need before you start, so they aren't constantly getting up and walking away from the table. You put on a playlist of background noise to set the mood and then make the volume super low so people can just barely hear it, but their lizard brain still hears it. For some reason, they tend to be more focused. And this is hardly a brilliant idea, but it does speed things up. So it does matter. I've noticed that's the thing. And that's it. Those are 8 things that you can do to speed up the process of dungeon crawling. And believe me, if you do all of them, you utilize all these techniques, and and they require both the dungeon master and the players, to do them. Your dungeon crawling will no longer be slow. It will be fast. It will be fun, and I hope you have a good time. So that's it for today. If you like this video, feel free to click like and subscribe on the bottom. It means the world to me. I'll know to make more of them. And if you have any comments or questions, go ahead and write them below. I love to read them. Other than that, thank you very much for watching.